Has listening to .NET Rocks helped your career? If so, that's great. Here's your chance to give back. Richard and I are trying to become less dependent on ad revenue, so we started a Patreon account. We're hoping to raise enough money so we can continue to pay our editors and our bandwidth bill with fewer ads. At the same time, you can show your gratitude for everything you've learned and make it possible for others to learn as well. Go to patreon.netrocks.com and take your place proudly among our patrons. Thank you. Hey, Carl here to say that Music to Code By is now an app called Music to Flow By. Now you can listen to the tracks on your phone with offline capability. The first 3 tracks are free, and the entire catalog is available by subscription with a new track arriving every month. Just go to musictoflowby.com for all the links. Welcome back to .NET Rocks. This is Carl Franklin.
And this is Richard Campbell.
And what's going on, man? We're getting ready to go to Build, aren't we?
Yeah, the Build event is approaching, and, you know, the usual level of chaos. There's a new podcasting space, so we'll be having some fun there. We're right across the hallway from Channel 9.
Which is going to be awesome.
Yeah, we might even end up with some Channel 9 time. There's still conversations going on there, so...
Yeah, I think we're going to try to do some live streaming as well.
Yeah, I think we should. It seems to be the hip thing. It's what all the cool kids are doing these days.
Right. I've been cracking that nut a lot lately, so I'm coming prepared.
Yeah, awesome.
Yeah, very good.
Looking forward to it. It'll be an adventure.
So, speaking of children's games, let's roll the music for Better Know Framework.
Awesome.
All
right, dude, what do you got?
I really wasn't speaking of children's games, but I will be now. FizzBuzz.
What's up, FizzBuzz?
FizzBuzz started as a kid's game to teach them math. You sort of sit around in a circle. You know, you start counting up from 1 to 100 or whatever.
Right.
And if the number is divisible by 3, you say fizz instead of the number. I guess it could be a drinking game too, right? If the number is divisible by 5, you say buzz instead of the number. And if it's divisible by 3 and 5, or 15, you say FizzBuzz.
Okay.
So, but it also has become a way to weed out non-programmers during for a job interview. So you write a program that does that, instead of just saying it. So what I have today is an enterprise edition of FizzBuzz.
Oh, really?
Yeah. It's on GitHub.
Wow.
Basically, it's a way to teach enterprise software architecture using a very common and well-known problem to solve. But it's kind of sarcastic. It's a little bit tongue-in-cheek. But what's cool about it is there's like over 200 open issues demanding more ritual and fashion.
Yes, of course, right there. Add blockchain, because of course, add blockchain and GDPR compliance.
Yeah, they've got Spring in there. They've got all sorts of crazy stuff, and it just is swatting a fly with a Buick, as I used to say.
Yep, that definitely enterprise class FizzBuzz. Yeah. How many lines of code can I to do this thing?
That's right.
That's hilarious.
All right, that's what I got. Who's talking to us, Richard?
I went back to the Wayback Machine a little there. Because, I don't know if you know this, but Mr. Lotka has been on the show a couple of times. So this is actually a comment from 1156, which is June of 2015, when we talked about .NET Everywhere. It was at the beginning of sort of the open source version of .NET, .NET Core, and all of that stuff. And also the beginning of... Rocky's new aorta, which we talked about a bit on the show. But this particular comment, I like looking back 3 years and saying the sort of relevance of this. This is from the pseudonym, I presume it's a pseudonym because nobody would name their child this, Mostly Lucid. And Mostly says, wow, your show is scary and how it seems to keep reading my mind or peeking into my workflow. Perfect timing on the import and export service for Azure. The more I use Azure, the more I use it. I like that line.
Yeah.
It sounds silly to say it that way, but it's like a never-ending rabbit hole of interesting and useful stuff. So thanks for another great show.
Cool.
So yeah, it's just interesting to see Azure slowly penetrating into folks, and the more you use it, the more you use it.
I tell you what, I used Azure something that I hadn't used before. I used it a couple of days ago. I had a database that I needed to upgrade. And of course, backing up SQL databases is really easy. And in fact, in Azure, you don't have to do anything. You can just go and restore from a point in the past.
Right.
And also copying to a new database is really easy. When you just in the SQL Azure dashboard, there's a copy button. And you just say, all right, what do you want to name the new one? And it copies it. And when it's done, it says, okay. And then you can roll back to a previous version. And that came in really handy. That's the best IT experience of backing up, restoring of a database that I think I've ever had.
Stuff that's normally terrifying just works.
Yep.
Yeah, that's a great description of cloud done right. That's normally terrifying. Yeah, push that button.
Press the
You're
button.
all good.
Yeah.
So Mostly, thank you so much for your comment. And a collection of music to code by is on its way to you. And if you'd like to get this amazing set of awesome sounds by my friend Carl Franklin, write a comment on the website at .netrocks.com or via any of our social media, because we publish every show to Facebook and Google+. And if you comment there or read it on the show, we'll send you a mug.
And definitely follow us on Twitter. I'm at Carl Franklin. He's at Rich Campbell. Send us a tweet. Fizz.
Buzz.
Oh, and by the way, we figured we've just about run out of mugs and want to switch it up a little bit. So we figured we'd give away something that's a little more useful to developers. So a Music to Code by collection is coming your way.
Yep, pretty good stuff.
Yeah. So let's get to our guest, of course. Rockford Lotka, otherwise known as Rocky, is the CTO at Magenic, which is one of the nation's premier Microsoft Gold certified partners, dedicated to solving today's most challenging business problems. He's the creator of the widely used CSLA.NET open source development framework and is a Microsoft regional director and MVP. He speaks at many conferences and user groups around the world and is a frequent guest on .NET Rocks. Welcome back, my friend.
It's great to be here. Nice talking to you guys.
Buzz, buzz, fizz. You know what I'm saying?
Fizz, buzz.
Oh boy, the insider joke day. That's what it's going to be.
That just tickled me.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I speaking of other things that are sort of symbols of being the digerati, my family all have, custom domains for their email addresses.
Of course.
And my wife's preferred email address starts as mail at, and then literally her name. Right? Yeah. Which, when you're the fellow digerati, you see an email like that, you're like, okay, you punch at a higher level, right?
Yeah, that's right.
Well, apparently the local community center has a filter over any mail, info, management, admin, and won't allow you to use those to subscribe to things.
Wow.
So she's like, I can make you a new alias if you'd like. How about community center is an idiot at?
Yeah, right. How about spam bot at? That'd be fun. Let's see what happens when you do that.
Yeah, see how they react that way. How about dumb spam bot?
Dumb spam bot.
Let's go full
delete me at. Well, Rocky, man, what's up? I see that you're as enamored with Blazor and WebAssembly as we have been, and it just seems to be where everybody's focusing their attention these days, not just on WebAssembly, but marrying sort of C# or and other languages in the .NET framework into the browser.
Well, and not just the .NET framework, but I think because we come from the Microsoft background, we often are looking at this from we can get .NET in the browser, but it's important to remember that WebAssembly is a neutral thing. It's not a Microsoft thing.
Sure.
So it's not just .NET, it's C and Go and Rust and Python.
All these things.
And I think Microsoft and the Microsoft community clearly have jumped on this because I think it's because we've got a multi-decade history of writing rich smart client apps. And originally on Windows for 20 plus years. And then Windows development has largely fallen by the wayside in favor of anything that can go cross-platform and have web-style deployment, which frankly has been the web.
Weird.
Yeah, weird indeed. All of a sudden, we've got this really awesome, I think, opportunity to bring a lot of the word monoculture, the JavaScript monoculture or hegemony. Those are a couple of my favorite words, right? But any platform that is bound to one programming language only is pretty limited, and really limits the kind of thought and creativity that gets applied to that platform.
Yeah,
and so I think. Not the JavaScript and Angular and React, all that stuff's not going to go away by any stretch. But what this does is the same thing that we saw with Java, 20 years ago, which is originally it was just this one language monoculture. And over time, they opened it up so that you end up with some of the more popular JDK languages aren't in fact Java.
Which I always thought was a very cool thing, right? This idea of it's just a runtime, play with language, which was always .NET and the CLR's claim to fame.
Yep, exactly right. And so I think, in my mind, this is like doubly awesome because on one level, you've got just WebAssembly itself. And I would be really surprised if we, especially given the popularity of Go, if we don't see some really interesting UI framework or frameworks come out of the Go community. I'd be disappointed, frankly. But then conversely, on the .NET side, we're bringing, I think ultimately what we'll see is a lot of not just C# but F# and a lot of the other existing .NET frameworks and tool capabilities.
Right.
And the maturity of that environment coming into the web client space.
Knowing that WebAssembly simply runs in the same context as JavaScript, doesn't it make more sense to just use JavaScript control suites such as they exist rather than need to reinvent them in the language du jour?
Well, maybe, but I think in a lot of cases, the frameworks that have come into being are tailored not only around the browser environment, but also around the strengths and weaknesses of JavaScript.
Right.
And we see that, even if you take the web out of it, if you look at frameworks that support F# versus C#, and they can interact because they're all running on .NET.
Right.
But they don't always interact in a nice way, and you wouldn't probably choose to use F# to program against a object-oriented C# based UI framework because there's an impedance mismatch. And I think the same thing is true here with frameworks, UI frameworks designed around JavaScript that aren't inherently object-oriented like C#. I think there's there's a impedance mismatch there that needs to be overcome.
And what you said before really rang true with me, which is we have invested a decade or more into the desktop sort of back-end languages that, before JavaScript, exploded on the scene. I mean, it's always been around, but before it exploded, and that there's a lot of developers out there that are just still struggling with all of this web stuff.
Well, I think to some degree, too, Carl, this is generational because you've got people like myself and you that were doing VB for, and smart, rich client, fat client, whatever term you want to use, back in the 90s.
Yep.
And, you look at the VB evolution, by the time you get to VB6, things were pretty freaking awesome.
Yeah, they were. Yeah.
And then we did, the web did a reset on us, and then .NET did a reset on us. And it took 5 years or so before Windows Forms really got close to where VB6 was.
Right.
2005. And it took, I think, even longer for the web to get there, certainly. And, there's a lot of reasons, not just technology. There's a whole lot of business and, big picture reasons why the web has had its big ups and downs. But now it's only been a few years, a short few years, that we've had really good UI frameworks like Angular and now React and Aurelia and Vue, etc.
Sure.
I remember going to conferences in 1999, 2000, 2001. And at that time, conferences were a whole different thing than they are now, because you had, even at a normal tech conference, you had people in suits and people with piercings and tattoos, high school dropouts, and then professional software folks, all mixing together.
Yep.
And it was a weird and kind of heady time. But there were hallway debates and lunch over, people were like, the browser should never become a rich thing. It should be a terminal-based deal. We want to run all of our code on the server.
Lean all the time.
Yeah, right.
And even at that point, there was a camp of people that were arguing, no, the browser should be the platform for writing all of our code. We shouldn't worry about Windows and Linux and blah, blah, blah. We should just write everything for the browser.
It should be the smart client host.
It should. That was the contention.
And a lot of companies invested in that. You had the Chromebook come out, the Google thinking about the browser as the operating system.
Yeah. And, this idea has roots way, way back. And that's, I guess, what I'm getting at. And just now, I think we're starting to see, over the past few years, we've seen a real emergence of this space with single-page apps and all of the JavaScript, TypeScript type frameworks.
Right.
But I've always felt like there was this really massive, quiet group of enterprise developers who have been sitting in the background waiting for something better.
Yep.
Something that didn't require them to go do JavaScript and, throw away all of their existing tech knowledge and whatnot.
Yeah.
And whether WebAssembly is or isn't that, I personally think it is. I think that it may take it another 2 or 3 years to mature to the point, but I think that's why there's so much interest, especially in the Microsoft space, is because all of these people that have spent amazing amounts of time building really cool apps with Windows Forms and WPF and even Silverlight or UWP perhaps, they're like, what is my path forward?
Right.
And now we can kind of get a glimpse. I mean, it's like, I think I see a path forward. Right? This is quite exciting.
It is quite exciting. What's the state of the asm.js based .NET runtime that Blazor is sitting on top of?
Well, there's a couple pieces to this. So there's the old asm.js concept, which has really become a fallback for older browsers that runs WebAssembly. JavaScript is actually running the WebAssembly.
Right. Yeah, that's how it started, right?
That's how it started. And now all of the modern browsers, so Chrome, Firefox, Edge, and Safari, to current browser versions, all support native WebAssembly.
Yeah.
So in that case, there's no JavaScript involved. It's actually the browser has a WebAssembly engine sitting right next to the JavaScript engine.
And Mono runs on top of that, or is implemented in WebAssembly?
That's correct. Yeah. And so there's a implementation or compile target for Mono that targets WebAssembly.
Yeah.
And then Blazor sits on top of that Mono implementation that's running inside of WebAssembly.
Yeah. That's brilliant.
And then there's also a project, and I think maybe you've had Frank on the show, I'm not 100% sure, but called OOUI. OOUI.
Talking to him on Thursday.
Yeah.
Okay. So there we go.
Yeah.
And that's... so I mean, this to me too is part of the really exciting thing, right? So you've got Blazor, which is out of the ASP.NET team, sitting on top of Mono, which is really out of the Xamarin team, and that's all Microsoft, but two different teams, right, working together to create this future. And then you've got 100% community-based stuff like this OOUI project, which is Xamarin Forms running on top of Mono in WebAssembly.
Yeah. Spoiler alert.
It's like, holy cow, right? This is, and that's why I talk about, the communities that exist around Go and Rust and Python. And, I just can't imagine those communities not getting excited about this sort of thing as well.
Yeah.
And saying, oh man, I could have, my language of choice running in the browser natively with a UI framework that's conforms to the way my language works and the way that my worldview works.
Right.
This is really, I think we're just at the inception, I guess is what I'm saying. I'm really quite optimistic about the future of this whole thing.
Yeah. And guys, hold that thought for just a second while we take a moment for this very important message. Hey, guess what, Rockheads? Progress Telerik wants to send someone to build. So they're having a contest. Step 1 is to sign up and learn about the new innovative modern UI tools they'll be announcing at Build. By registering, you'll be entered to win a full conference pass to Microsoft Build plus a $500 travel stipend. They're also giving away 3 Telerik DevCraft UI licenses. And for .NET Rocks listeners, they'll also be giving away a Telerik DevCraft UI license every week. All you have to do is register at buildcontest.pwop.me. That's buildcontest.pwop.me. Progress offers the leading platform for developing and deploying mission-critical business applications. The creator of the award-winning Telerik, .NET, and Kendo UI, JavaScript user interface components and controls, reporting solutions, and productivity tools, Progress offers all the tools developers need to build high-performant, modern apps with outstanding UI. Go now to buildcontest.pwop.me and sign up to win. And we're back. Rocky Lotka's here with us. I'm Carl Franklin, Richard Campbell, .NET Rocks. And we're talking about Blazor, this amazing project, and how it may breathe new life into, well, at least in the .NET space, certainly, but a lot of these other technologies, non-web technologies that now suddenly have a way to reach out and be deployed just as easily as a web app. Let's talk about the component model, or what they want to do with the component model for Blazor. Does this have legs? Is it possible that we could bring back an actual marketplace for software components again?
I think that's a realistic consideration. Obviously, at this point, Blazor is really new and very experimental, but there's no doubt that when you look at even the way it is right now, and just so we're clear, because not everybody may know what Blazor is really all about. So on the client in the browser, having nothing to do with any server at all. So on the client, you've got assembly code running in WebAssembly, and Mono is built on top of that.
Right.
And so you have .NET running in the browser.
Yeah.
But not like Silverlight. It's not a plugin or anything, because WebAssembly is a native piece of the browser. It's literally just like JavaScript. And then on top of Mono in the browser, then you've got this ASP.NET project called Blazor, which is really the Razor engine, along with some other stuff, lifetime management, or like page lifecycle and whatnot, the things you would expect, right? Routing, layouts, and so forth.
Sure.
Running in the browser, though. So you compose your UI using Razor syntax, which is a smart move, I think, because a lot of people have learned Razor over the years.
Right.
But this Razor, your Razor syntax stuff here is actually being compiled and rendered, if you will, in the browser. There's no server components to it at all. And the code behind your Razor pages is C# or .NET code. And so as the user clicks buttons or does, otherwise interacts with the web page that is rendered ultimately in HTML, but based on your Razor, but any events that occur, you end up handling those events in your C# code that's running on the client.
Nice.
Right.
So in this regard, conceptually, it's identical to the way you would think about Windows Forms or WPF programming.
But it's the program model of MVC.
But it's the programming model kind of MVC. Yeah.
With Razor.
They borrowed a lot of concepts.
Yeah.
Right.
Could get confusing.
Well,
it's my event happening.
I think that's exactly right. And this is where folks that have spent their career doing smart client development, I think, have a leg up, because we're already used to this model, right? And I think this is where folks that have spent their career maybe doing Razor on the server have a major learning curve, it's the same learning curve we all went through, years and years ago as smart client developers when we had to learn how to do server-side web programming.
Right, sure.
Right? Only it's the inverse. It's like, you can actually maintain state between pages, and you can use data binding in a rich way, and you can do like if the user's entering some complex order, you can do all of the pricing and tax calculations and even discount calculations right there on the browser, which you can also do in JavaScript. But there's this mentality by a whole lot of folks that I talk to. It's like, no, it's running in the browser. All that all that stuff needs to run on the server.
Right.
And of course, for everybody who wrote VB6, Windows Forms, WPF, we're like, no, why would you do that on the server? Right? I can do all that on the client. Why would I waste time going round tripping on the network and wasting server CPU cycles when my cell phone is essentially a supercomputer?
That's right.
It's like multi-core.
Yeah.
The demo that Scott Hanselman did at Dev Intersection in the spring on Blazor, he showed in studio, and all the stuff was super beta or even alpha, that he had his validation code in sort of a shared library, all written in C# that ran, and it was literally the same lines of code that ran both on the client and the server. So you could, because we've always had that problem with web development where it's like, you want to validate on the client because it's nice and responsive, but you still want to be very sure before you're, calling on the back end and trying to write to a database that it's validated again. It just sucks to write validation twice.
Yep.
Well, and what he showed is not just shared code, but it's a shared DLL.
Right.
Because that shared code is a Net Standard 2 DLL or project.
Yep.
And the DLL is literally deployed to the client and the server, but it's the same DLL. And of course, this caught my imagination, as you might guess, because wouldn't it be cool if there was some sort of like framework that helped you keep your business logic in a organized fashion and had a rules engine and maybe even supported data binding that was designed exactly for this scenario,
right?
And had been being built over the last 20 years. And lo and behold, I got CSLA running on Blazor.
See, I was going to ask that question. It's like, when are we going to see a Blazor implementation of CSLA? And
it
sounds like it wasn't that painful.
It was not. There definitely are some weird gotchas, and I suspect a lot of them will get smoothed out over time. Because this, like you said, the Blazor and Mono stuff is all alpha at this point in time. But yes, it took me maybe 2 days worth of futzing around. Most of that time, there's not yet debugger support for the client-side code in Blazor.
Right. For obvious reasons.
Yep.
Yeah. Well, I hope they can fix it, because I got to say that the first third of my career was pre-Windows, right? It was all DECVAC stuff, and most of the debugging back then was done using print statements to
print line.
Yes. So I got a walk through memory lane on how painful that world was.
Wow. Remember when we used to do this all the time?
But it must make you feel like, okay, this is actually doable, and this is a realm, a milieu that I'm comfortable with.
Oh, it's perfect. I mean, like I said, this idea of having a shared DLL, same code running on the client and the server, and being able to run all the business logic on the client to give the user a great experience.
Right.
And then if you feel the need, you can rerun the logic or some of the logic on the server to revalidate what was done.
Yep.
This is literally the world I've been preaching for 20 years. And so having a technology from Microsoft that uses this concept as its centerpiece, to me is just obviously very exciting and kind of validating.
Yeah, no.
Well, hey, Richard.
Yeah, buddy.
Guess what time it is now?
I must be that happy time again.
Yes, sir. It's time to fix some Star Trek holodeck code with my Razor Blazor laser phaser.
Oh, no.
I could have just said blazer phaser, but
add a few more alliterations in there. It just ups the silly, doesn't it?
It does. Thanks for not laughing, Rocky. That was really awesome. It's actually time to give away a D-Experience subscription from our friends at DevExpress to one lucky member of the .NET Rocks fan club. Everyone knows that DevExpress has great desktop controls, but their web tools are simply amazing. They have this collection of HTML5 JavaScript controls called DevExtreme. And at the heart of this product line are these really powerful controls like grid, chart, pivot, grid, tree list, and scheduler. Big controls. But DevExtreme also comes with more than 50 touch-optimized client-side controls. Data visualizers, navigators, editors, lists, dialogues, and notification controls, and general purpose controls like a filter builder, range slider, file uploader, scroll view, and more. And since they're all HTML, JavaScript, and CSS, they include integrations with things like jQuery, Knockout, React, Ionic, and Angular. Plus, DevExtreme controls come with ASP.NET MVC and ASP.NET Core wrappers, so they're infinitely flexible.
Nice.
But don't take our word for it. Go for a test drive now at dx.netrocks.com. That's dx.netrocks.com.
All right, buddy. Who's our winner?
Today's winner, Richard, is Andrea Angela.
Oh, congratulations, Andrea.
Yes.
Golf clap for you.
And Andrea just won the D-Experience subscription. That's a big pile of awesome from our friends at DevExpress just for being a member of the .NET Rocks fan club. And you too can be a member. Just go to .NETRocks.com, click on the big Get Free Stuff button, answer a few questions, and join up. We have thousands of members all over the world, and every show we like to give away stuff from our sponsors. And every December we give away a $5,000 technology shopping spree to one lucky member of the .NET Rocks fan club. But you have to sign up to win. All right, Rocky, it's been a while. You got $5,000. You're going shopping. What are you going to buy?
Well, I'm going to take a different twist on the question this time because I've been doing a lot of work in the kind of diversity space in our industry. And I think if I had $5,000, I would push it toward some of the groups that are running code camps for girls or women in technology or other diverse groups. There's some similar things for inner city kids, that might not have access to a lot of technology. And I would push it toward those type of organizations at this point.
Awesome. That's a very cool thing to do. I always love to hear that, when somebody's giving back to kids and giving technology to kids. Great stuff.
For sure. Just on a random chance, literally yesterday, I spent the whole day with a pack of middle school kids talking about jobs in STEM.
Wow.
And they're middle schoolers, right?
Yeah.
They're the 13 and 14-year-olds that they're basically a biological manifestation of an eye roll.
Yeah, right.
But when you can light those kids up with some ideas, stuff they just haven't thought of or didn't know about, it's a great moment.
Well, for me, it was right around 8th or 9th grade is when the fire got lit, and I realized just how much fun this whole computer thing could be. So,
yeah.
I mean, that is the time. You really have to be involved, or somebody has to present to the 8th and 9th grade type group that this stuff can be cool and can be highly really creative, right. And it's really fun. Yeah.
The thing that I learned when I did this a few years ago with when my kid was in middle school was not to concentrate on the technology so much, but what you can do with it, right? Show the magic. Show yes, I wrote this program and here's what it does. And I'm going to show a little bit of code, but I don't want to overwhelm people. I want them to just catch the fire and say, wow, I want to do that.
Yeah, isn't the key to get them to say, how did you do that?
Exactly.
And then you show them the code?
You want I told this story before, but I have this app that I use sockets, and in particular UDP, to connect to a MIDI keyboard and play my piano, which has a MIDI receptor in it, the grand piano, remotely. And when I did that and I showed people the Skype of, my keys going up and down that wasn't anywhere near the school, the kid stood up in the back and goes, "That's not real." And I said, "You come up and play something." And he did. And people were just losing their mind.
Yeah, that's so cool.
Yeah, I love everything about that. I had one kid yesterday that was your typical disengaged, why am I at school kind of kid. And we were at some point, the conversation turned to Mars, and he wanted big glass domes holding an atmosphere over Mars. I'm like, well, look, we got these radiation problems, so we'll probably be underground in lava tubes and later stay buried. And then he asked a couple more questions, which was great. And then in the hallway afterwards, caught up with me again and says, isn't there a way to make glass that's radiation proof? And, because of the way my brain works, I said, what you're looking for is boron nitrates. You go look up boron nitrates. If you can make them transparent, you could make radiation proof glass.
Wow.
And he went running away, and his teacher said, that's the most excited I've ever seen that kid.
That is so cool. Now he's got a mission.
Yep.
Yeah.
And it happened to be, I read a paper from NASA about they're trying to put boron nitrate stranding into spacesuits to reduce radiation exposure. So who knows?
Awesome.
Who knows when you actually move someone, change their career path.
That's right.
We were not going to see the results of these efforts we've all been involved in for 10 years.
Yep. So where do you see this going, Blazer?
Well, I'm rather hopeful. At the beginning of the show, you guys were talking about build, and I will also be there. And I really am hoping that Microsoft has some good content and enthusiasm around Blazer, but even more importantly, around Mono on WASM.
Right.
Because that's the base, right? Blazer is a really cool experiment, and I do hope it goes forward. But more important is that we get some solid supported implementation of .NET running on WASM, on top of which other things can be built. Including the Wii project, but who knows what other people might think of, right?
Yeah.
And
do they really call it WASM?
Yeah.
It's WebAssembly, but it's WASM.
So that's pretty awesome.
Yeah.
We got to have those buzzy, fizzy words to say.
Totally.
Yep.
Yeah. It's interesting to see how Microsoft sort of hedged here, where they've moved it over to ASP.NET. It's no longer in Steve Sanderson's personal repository. But I guess they're just looking to see if we care enough. That's what it seems to me, is we're going to have to generate demand for Blazor before they would productize it.
That does seem to be their approach at this time, yes, is that they're putting this out here. They are continuing to work on it. In fact, just this week, there were a couple releases, or last week, but within the last couple days. So there's kind of this steady pace of improvement. There's a lot of activity on the repo and GitHub. There's also a Gitter channel that has pretty nonstop dialogue. There's a bunch of people that are answering questions, asking questions. I've mostly been in the asking mode so far,
right?
Personally, but it's really active. The community is very open and receptive. A lot of people trying a lot of different things. So it's not just like CSLA getting that working for me was a big deal, but there's other people that have been trying other frameworks, their own frameworks, creating brand new frameworks.
Yeah.
To your question earlier, Carl, will there be a component-based model in the future of this thing? I strongly suspect the answer is yes, because this thing is just designed in a way that it makes it pretty easy to envision how someone would create UI components that would plug in, or back-end components like CSLA that would plug in.
Yeah.
And so I totally see that happening.
Yeah, we know of some component vendors that are already working on it.
Really?
Yep.
Wow.
I don't know if I can say who they are, but
no, you better not.
But I know they're doing it.
Yeah.
Yep.
I'm looking at the closed pull requests on the Blazor project. And I look at two things that are important to me when I'm sort of evaluating a project like that. One is how often are PRs being closed, and it's every day. And the next is who's contributing, and it's not the top 10. Like the top 10 contributors, definitely Steve Sanderson, Dan Roth, like guys like that are contributing. But I also see rock star contributors, like when regular people are contributing to a project, that says a lot to me about where it's at and what's going on.
And they want it to succeed.
Yeah. And make no mistake, Steve Standerson is still a god who is driving so much of this. But the fact that other people are putting pieces in place, that there is a sense of a community around here. It's only 30 or so contributors so far. This is a weird language thing. It does say something very interesting about what's going on here.
Sanderson is the most humble genius you will ever get the pleasure to meet in person.
I'm not going to argue with you, my friend. Yeah,
unbelievable human being.
Yeah, extraordinary.
Yeah.
The weird part about Blazor, and I think it's sort of a subtle thing, is the reason they're using mono is you need that C version of .NET, because in the end, WASM depends on LLVM and the whole C compiling path. They can't use .NET Core because it's written in C#.
Yep, and maybe that will change in the future. Yeah, it'd be interesting to see that happen. But frankly, though, I guess I'm not sure I care because Xamarin runs on Mono.
Right. Yeah. I mean, isn't Xamarin converting to Core?
I think that's on the roadmap.
Yeah.
And this is where I kind of suspect, too, that if we all look at this whole WASM, Blazor, whatever tech, Xamarin Forms in the browser, all this stuff, right? And as a community, we get as excited about it as... Again, I really think there's just this massive pile of developers and code, smart client code that has been dead-ended for like the last 5 or 6 years, right?
Sure.
And so if this does provide a reasonable path forward and there's some enthusiasm, I got to think that Microsoft would figure out how to get .NET Core running in the browser.
Because it's ultimately in Microsoft's best interest. If this is an important thing, is to try and get to one code base. Like this fragmentation of .NET, it's a problem.
Yep,
it is. And like I said, just when I was trying to get my stuff running in the browser, some of the issues I was running into are mismatches between Mono and Net Standard,
right?
Just tweaky stuff. Some of it is because the current implementation of Mono in the browser is using an interpreter. It's not pre-compiled,
right?
And so the working theory is that some of the issues that I ran into with my code, but also if you try to use Newtonsoft's JSON serializer, parts of it work and parts of it don't, and the parts that don't are failing for the same reason my stuff is.
Interesting.
And the theory is that it's probably because it's the Mono interpreter that just can't handle some of the more advanced scenarios.
Right.
And so now my brain, digs into that old education around compiling and so forth. It says, what would they have to do to take .NET Core and get it WASMable? So they're literally going to... Is that a word? I don't think that's a word. I made a word.
I think you just made up a new word.
WASMable. I'm embracing the word, man. But you're talking about essentially taking C# and generating WASM from it then. Like that's a non-trivial chunk of work just to have a consistent code base. But it might be worth it long term. Like what I'm also thinking in terms of is this is a metric of commitment by Microsoft. If they bypass that old Mono code base and go into more direct, this goes through .NET Core, you'll know they're all in.
Well, that's true. Substantial investment to make that happen, like you said. And I kind of suspect that what we will see, or if anything, but I cross my fingers and hope that we see some great conversation around this at Build, even if they just commit to building out Blazor and on top of Mono and really putting some energy, because right now the Mono thing is also experimental. So if they say, hey, we're going to get Mono working on WASM with a native compilation or pre-compiler, so it's not running in interpreted mode, even that level of commitment is non-trivial.
No. And especially if they get it all compliant with .NET Standard, maybe 2.1. So that in theory, you don't need to only have one chunk of source because the standard, gets you there. The code that you've written that was running against .NET Core should run in Blazor against the Mono under the .NET standard.
Right. Today's Mono is, from what I can tell, 99.99% compliant with Net Standard.
So why does that 0.1% keep spanking me?
Well, it's because you're doing things you shouldn't do. You're playing on the edge.
Don't do that. Just stop.
Oh my goodness. Well, and when I say me, I really mean you, Rocky, that you're finding those edges.
Well, but I am playing on the edge, and I freely admit that. So, if there are going to be differences across some of these platforms, and frankly, there always are. I mean, that's
sure.
We live in a world now, and for the foreseeable future, I think, where there's constantly going to be these new platforms popping up, right? New mobile OSs, new thises and that's and devices. If Microsoft can keep .NET Core and Mono and the UWP version of .NET Core and all of those compliant with Net Standard for if those of us that are writing frameworks that live on the edge have to deal with some pain, we chose that life, right?
Yeah.
And for everybody else, though, realistically, you shouldn't ever see that pain. Right. And I don't think most people do today. I think if you are at this point building your code for Net Standard, you'll find that almost without fail, your normal code, business code in particular, is going to run on full .NET and .NET Core and Mono.
Yep.
And it will probably run just fine in Blazor right now, too.
What's the story for hardware access, to things like video cameras and audio services and low-level things and file access? Because those are all things that, while there's new extensions that are coming out for browsers to be able to do that, they're still a little wonky and sandboxed somewhat, and we don't want a security risk. What's your thought on that?
I don't see that changing other than what we've already seen, because WebAssembly runs in the browser just like JavaScript, and so it's in the same sandbox, has the same limitations and the same capabilities.
Right.
And so, when you get to GPSs and cameras and USB devices, etc., the browsers have to support that,
right,
and expose all of those services in a safe way to whatever is running in the sandbox.
Yeah, they haven't been all that good about being standard. I mean, they're getting better, but they haven't been all that good, and mostly because, let's face it, they run on every platform. They have to implement those low-level things for each platform and make them consistent across all of them. And it's not like these hardware platforms ever change or anything.
I got to think, though, that the browser, really we're only talking 4 big browsers, right?
Right.
That the people, they've got to be feeling pressure, not just because of WebAssembly, but even already from all of the JavaScript, TypeScript type work that's being done, that as the browser, I honestly think as the browser does become the client-side runtime in place of Mac OS or Windows or whatever, and I'm sure I'm pissing some people off here, but I really think this is the case, right? That over the next few years, we're going to see that just 90-some%, most code ends up, non-games anyway, ends up just running in the browser,
right?
Cross-platform. And as an app developer, I don't care if my consumers are Mac or Windows people, as long as they've got a modern browser.
Right.
But that does put the onus on Mozilla and Chrome and Edge and Safari.
Yeah.
That they are now the client-side OS.
They are the runtime.
They are the runtime.
Yeah,
and so
this was what Mark Andreessen was proposing in the 90s.
That's right.
And it's a great vision, isn't it?
Yeah. And now it's coming true. But I also think the progressive web app is taking JavaScript in the browser to all of the capabilities of a desktop development environment. And then WASM is a way to take all those desktop development environment languages or smartphone development languages and also make them available in the browser. So the browser just becomes the nexus of client-side development.
Yep.
Yeah, I agree. And yeah, we didn't even talk about PWAs until now, but I think that's another key component of this future. So especially if you look at what Microsoft is doing with this upcoming release of Windows 10, where PWAs are a first-class citizen in the Microsoft Store.
Right.
And then you start thinking, I could write my PWAs using Blazor and C#. It's like, this is a pretty interesting alternative to click once with WPF.
It's getting there.
Well, and if you look back on the shows the past couple of months, we've been feeling around about this. We've been talking about better installers for smart clients. We certainly talked about PWAs. We certainly talked about Blazor. Like, it's all coming at this point of where enterprise development is going to be done through the browser. And I just wonder if in the end this comes down to because deployment.
Yeah.
I've thought that was true since the 97 or something, when the web started to really emerge in the enterprise space, is that the real driver here is that, and I'll put a lot of the blame, frankly, on Microsoft. They never came up with a great way to deploy, at the time, VB6 apps.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
If they would have provided that, we might not have all jumped on the web as fast, but we wrote all these apps and couldn't deploy the darn things.
And I think the actual hard problem there was the security element. Because the browser sets the context for security in that sandbox, you don't have to jump through the strongly named assemblies and certificate requirements and so forth that many of these installers are demanding on, because it's the only way to make the kind of code you're able to install in a smart client onto a desktop machine safe.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly right. You're not running on you're using the local hardware, but only within the bounds that are deemed safe for freely downloaded code.
Right.
Which doesn't solve every problem, but I get in these discussions sometimes, and people are like, but I need to do X, Y, and Z, and what if I need to reformat the hard drive or something? And I'm like, well, your typical business apps don't need to do that, right?
So the answer is, why would you do that? How about this? Don't do that. There's certainly going to be classes of apps that don't work this way, but for your typical enterprise, forms over data types apps, and even the more modern ones where we are going to be playing with cameras and GPS and motion sensing and so forth, more and more the tooling looks pretty good for that. It also hits me that you talk about it back in build 2011, the original build, when they were talking about what Windows 8 was about. There was sandboxing going on in your installed apps. Like, they were trying to solve this problem the other way, and people hated it. People being developers.
That's exactly right. It's the same kind of issue when they first added what was it called? UAP, the Windows Vista.
UAC.
UAC,
and they maybe went a little overboard, but it was the same deal there.
Yeah, all the way back to XPSP2.
And I kind of chuckle at everybody. We were all spoiled, right? We can do anything we want.
Yeah.
And they add those dialogues, which were a little obnoxious, but if you're a Mac user, or a Linux desktop user, you were already used to that model.
Yeah, that's true.
And so, Microsoft maybe went a little too far, and now they've backed off to be pretty much the same as Linux and Mac. And so, it's a culture change for developers and for end users that, you have to meet in the middle. But for most, like you said, for most business apps, I'm displaying data maybe in some really nice, rich ways, and I'm collecting data, but it's all going back to a server.
Right.
And I don't need to do fancy, low-level manipulation of my physical device's hard drive or whatever.
Yeah.
And so why can't I run in a sandbox?
Yeah. Why shouldn't I? Why wouldn't I press those security requirements over to the container, essentially, to the browser, so that IT has control over that, and I don't ever have to think about it as a developer. It's already done.
I just hope the Visual Studio tooling continues to evolve and get better, because that's where a lot of us are these days, and I'm really looking forward to it.
Yeah, me too. And I think the one of the advantages of what they're doing with Blazor is that you, of course, right now you have to run the Visual Studio Preview, but it all comes packaged in a V6 file. And so you just install the Visual Studio Preview, you install the V6, and off you go. You've got Blazor templates integrated in. And the big limitation right now is that there's no client-side debugging.
Yeah.
But we hope that, I think that's on their roadmap. I mean, I think that's a thing that they will figure out how to resolve.
Well, Rocky, it's always great to talk to you, and this was no exception. It's an exciting time. We always say this, it's an exciting time to be a .NET developer, but this is really, really hitting home for us. So thanks for sharing, and we'll see you, where are we going to see you? Build?
Build.
See you at Build.
All right. See you there.
Great. Thank you so much.
Yes, sir. And we'll see you next time on .NET Rocks. .NET Rocks is brought to you by Franklin's Net and produced by Pwop Studios, a full-service audio, video, and post-production facility located physically in New London, Connecticut, and of course in the cloud. Online at pwop.com. Visit our website at dotnetrocks.com for RSS feeds, downloads, mobile apps, comments, and access to the full archives going back to show number 1, recorded in September 2002. And make sure you check out our sponsors. They keep us in business. Now go write some code. See you next time. Got transmitter banned by the FCC. Yes, I'm a toy boy. Life is hard.